From my recent videos, we can safely say China Airlines is indeed one of the top airlines in the region, with their superior in-flight service and hard product. But it wasn't always like this. Let's take a deep dive into the Wild West previous era of this airline, and why we hope history will not repeat itself.
Step 1, wake up early, gonna rise with the sun. Step 2, get some good, some food in you. Step 3, think real hard about what you wanna be. Step 4, everybody just do your thing.
Wake up, today's gonna be a good day. 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 Wake up.
Good morning guys, and welcome back to my video. And today I'm coming to you from Taipei Taoyuan International Airport. I had just gotten off a flight from Melbourne earlier on with China Airlines. So I'm here on a transit, and I am now heading for the next flight to Sapporo in Japan. The previous flight was an A350, so the next flight is going to be a 777, I think. So yeah, I'm pretty eager to see how the economy class products on China Airlines will differ for these two aircraft types. Yeah, so come along with me and see what the economy class product on this 777 is all about. Let's do this.
Everybody just do your thing.
If you're new to my channel, my name's Brian. Born and bred in Singapore, I now live in Australia, and I create heaps of travel and food-related content. This travel series sees me set foot in 8 cities in 4 countries over the course of 2 weeks. My first international port of entry is in Sapporo, Japan, where I feast my way through this extremely chilly capital city of Hokkaido. The wonderful first-class hospitality of Japan Airlines leaves me impressively speechless as they take me to Osaka, where the amazing culinary journey continued. My visit in Japan concluded in Tokyo. So much to see, so much to eat. Japan Airlines then takes me to China, where I experience some of the most frustrating airport transfers I've ever done in Shanghai Pudong, before my old friend China Airlines takes me to Taiwan. Kaohsiung feeds me very well as I explore this southern port city. I say hello to Kinmen for a short stay before ending up in Taipei, where the colorful and vibrant foodie scene is second to none. There's lots to unpack in this series, filled with flight reviews, train journeys, and destination vlogs. And these videos will be linked in the description in chronological order when they're published. If you'd like to make a direct impact into the growth of my channel, give me a like and share this video with a friend. Even better, hit subscribe and the bell icon so you won't miss the next exciting episode of this series. So here's the thanks, because your support is very much appreciated. Taoyuan Airport is the bustling hub of China Airlines. Taipei is often the end of the journey for many, because out of the 35 million passengers they handled in 2023, just over 100,000 were in transit like I am today. To understand how China Airlines came to be, we go back to December 16, 1959, when the airline was established. It was founded by a retired Air Force officer, and this would set the path for its hiring practices for pilots for the next few decades, which would put the airline in an extremely precarious position. We'll explore more of that as we go along. Taoyuan Airport presently has 2 terminals. The opening intro was done at the older Terminal 1, which explains the construction style because that was built in 1979. It is linked to the newer Terminal 2, where I'm walking through now, which was opened in July 2000. And it is a lot airier with its much wider surrounds and natural lighting. The boarding gates at Terminal 2 all have different themes showcasing different parts of Taiwan you can visit. This morning, I was on flight CI-130, which was departing from Gate Delta 8. The theme featured here was about the endemic bird species unique to this country. Avid bird watchers would be very pleased. The safety record of China Airlines was always a hot topic back in the day. It did not take long after the airline's formation for the first crash to happen. In January 1969, a Douglas C-47 took off from Taidong Airport bound for Kaohsiung. It never made it to its destination. It flew into the side of a mountain en route, killing everyone on board. This crash was turbulence related, and the understanding of downdrafts when flying around a mountain was not yet widely understood then. Pilot error was not the cause of this one. But as we head into the 70s, we'd better buckle up, because the flight path ahead can only be best described as insanely bumpy. Flight CI-130 from Taipei Taoyuan to Sapporo New Chitose Airport was operated by Bravo 18051 this morning. A Boeing 777-300ER, which first flew in July 2014. It is owned by GECAS, and it has been leased to China Airlines from October that year, making this airframe just under 10.5 years old at the time of writing. As the 1970s came about, China Airlines ushered in the jet era with the Boeing 707 and the 727. Regional routes were covered by the smaller jet reaching South Vietnam, Hong Kong, Japan and Singapore. The 707s flew east across the Pacific towards the west coast of America via Japan and Honolulu. When diplomatic ties between Japan and China was established in 1975, all flights between Taiwan and Japan were suspended for a while because of opposition from China. Therefore, China Airlines became one of the early customers of the Boeing 747 Super Performance aircraft. This 747 SP, as it was called, had an extended range which would allow China Airlines to fly non-stop across the Pacific towards Los Angeles and San Francisco. In the later part of the 1970s, this 747 SP also touched down in Dhahran in Saudi Arabia and Johannesburg in South Africa. I have waxed lyrical about the stunning and spectacular cabin on a China Airlines aircraft. This cabin revamp was introduced in 2015 as part of the Next Gen Era branding initiative. The refurbished cabin was inaugurated with the delivery of the first Boeing 777-300ER aircraft like this one. These beautiful fittings were slightly enhanced when the Airbus A350s were introduced a year later, with very subtle differences between the two aircraft types. To an untrained eye, you would miss these differences by blinking. China Airlines began the decade in 1970 with a crash in August when flight CI-206 crashed on approach into Taipei Songshan Airport. This was probably the first of many crashes going forward involving pilot error, because this was a controlled flight into terrain, as the crew flew the YS-11 turboprop aircraft into a ridge, failing to recognize they were flying too close to terrain before landing. 14 of the 31 souls on board perished that day. This was followed very closely by a bomb exploding on board flight CI-825 in 1971, as the Caravel aircraft was en route between Taipei Songshan and Hong Kong's Kai Tak Airport. Another Douglas C-47 had a mid-air collision in 1975. Then a Boeing 707 crashed shortly after takeoff from the then newly opened airport in Taoyuan. No one survived these three accidents. In the midst of all this, a 737 was hijacked in 1978 en route from Kaohsiung to Hong Kong. The hijacker was killed by an air marshal, and although the aircraft landed safely in Hong Kong, that 737 in question would crash a couple of years later off the coast of Penghu Airport. Just how much drama can radiate from this airline? Be careful with what you ask. Because if you think the 70s were bad, we're now heading into the 1980s. As we get airborne from Taoyuan Airport, let's take a look at the flight path for flight CI-130. Upon leaving the island of Taiwan, we would coast into Japan over Fukuoka, then skimming the northern shoreline of the main island of Honshu, passing Niigata, flying between Mutsu and Hakodate, before swinging around in the opposite direction to land at New Chitose International Airport, clocking a distance of just under 2,700 kilometers and a flight time of 3 hours, 12 minutes. 1980s is an era where everything was supersized. Big hair, big baggy pants, big baggy sleeves, big shoulder pads, big earrings to knock you unconscious should you shake your head to say no. As this decade came about, aircraft types were also getting bigger as air travel took hold and more passengers took to the skies. So with every accident, it also meant the stakes were now a lot bigger as well. Before we dive into the tragic era of the 80s, let's take a look at what's for brekkie this morning. Since we were bound for Japan, definitely something Japanese was part of the menu options. I went for the hamburger, which is a German-style burger patty which has been adapted to Japanese tastes. It's one of my favorite Japanese food items, so I was really happy this was offered. The other option was a chicken curry with turmeric rice, which looked delicious as well. The hamburger was expectedly mouth-watering, and the accompanying pasta definitely rounded off this meal really well. Point to note though, the cabin crew were ping-ponging back and forth very easily between spoken English, Mandarin, and Japanese. For better or worse, Taiwan was colonized by Japan between 1895 to 1945. So a lot of Japanese sensibilities have remained in Taiwan, from the social etiquette to culinary influences. But I digress. Welcome to the 1980s. This decade began quite literally with a loud bang. It did not take long for an incident to happen. In February 1980, a 747-200, which was just 6 months old at that time, suffered a minor tail strike on landing at Hong Kong's Kai Tak Airport. While tail strikes are common, how they are repaired means a world of a difference. I'd like you to take a moment to remember this aircraft, because this would be linked to another accident at the end of this video. In the same month, a Boeing 707 crashed just short of the runway in Manila, killing 2 passengers. This was flight CI-811, and this very same flight number would be carrying opposition Senator Ninoy Aquino in August 1983, where he would be assassinated on arrival in Manila after he disembarked on the tarmac, in full view from an aircraft still filled with passengers. The bad news just kept on coming. In February 1985, a Boeing 747 SP was cruising above the Pacific Ocean bound for Los Angeles. The aircraft experienced a number 4 engine flameout, and the crew was so fixated in trying to solve the issue, they did not notice the autopilot rolling the aircraft in its attempt to maintain altitude as the airspeed was steadily decreasing. The giant aircraft eventually stalled and plunged towards the sea as the crew struggled to gain control. The aircraft was thankfully stabilized and it leveled out just a couple of thousand feet above the Pacific Ocean. The aircraft was subjected to excessive forces during the wild maneuvers. It lost portions of the rear horizontal stabilizers, the main landing gear doors, and the main wings were permanently bent upwards by 5 centimeters. Miraculously, there were only 2 serious injuries on that flight. Remember that 737 which was hijacked in 1978? Well, that very same airframe was performing a landing at Penghu Airport in February 1986, and the nose tire blew on touchdown. The aircraft performed a go-around during which the aircraft crashed into the sea, killing 13 people. The decade of tragedy ended in October 1989, where another 737 flew into the mountain on takeoff from Hualien after the cockpit crew used the wrong climb-out procedure for takeoff. 54 people perished in that one. It pains me to cover this decade. Welcome to the 90s, which would end up being the deadliest decade of the airline with the number of lives lost. It started with a crash of Flight CI-358 in December 1991, which was a Boeing 747-200 cargo plane. After reporting an issue with engine number 2 on takeoff, the crew lost control of the aircraft and it slammed into a hill, killing all 5 crew members on board. This wasn't pilot error, but more of an issue with how the engine pylons were constructed back then, leading some to fail and engines falling off. The first ever dramatic loss of a Boeing 747-400 then occurred in November 1993 as CI-605 landed in Hong Kong's Kai Tak Airport during a typhoon. The aircraft touched down too late and was unable to stop before the end of the runway. It ended up in Victoria Harbour, but everyone survived to tell the tale. The next crash would be the deadliest in the airline's history. In April 1994, CI-140, an Airbus A300, was on the final approach for Nagoya when the first officer accidentally selected the takeoff and go-around setting on his control yoke. This caused the aircraft to increase thrusts and pitch the nose up as the computers began to take the aircraft out of the approach. Instead of disconnecting the autopilot, the crew manually pushed the nose down and reduced throttle in an attempt to bring the aircraft back to its landing. The computer fought back and raised the nose even further. By the time the crew realized landing had to be aborted and disconnected the autopilot, the aircraft, with its nose pitched very high and a burst of thrust applied, the Airbus shot up into the sky almost vertically before stalling and falling vertically flat to the ground with almost zero ground speed. All this happened within 100 seconds. Out of the 271 people on board, only 7 survived. The number of fatalities was astounding. Patience was running out for the airline to turn itself around, and this high number of deaths in a single crash was a wake-up call. The bulk of pilots hired by the airline were ex-Air Force officers, which many felt had contributed to these crashes over the decades. Top-down regimental, patriarchal overtones within the cockpit meant no one had dared to question the captain in command, even when lives were at stake. An overhaul in its hiring practices was soon set in place, and emphasis was then put on hiring civilians, training them from the ground up. And the industry-accepted way of crew resource management, or CRM, implemented in an attempt to change the way crew members interact with each other in the cockpit, regardless of rank. Overriding everything else was the rebranding of China Airlines in 1995, from the nationalistic colors of the Taiwanese flag to the plum blossom livery we all know today. With a brand new fresh outlook, China Airlines looked to the future as the entire operations had an overhaul from top to bottom. But lightning was sadly set to strike again. In February 1998, CI-676 was returning from Bali and in the final stages of approach into Taipei Taoyuan Airport in extremely bad weather. The pilot requested to go around, peeled off from the approach, pitched the aircraft up very quickly and stalled the Airbus. CI-676 fell to the ground in an almost exact way like CI-140 in Nagoya 4 years earlier. This time there were no survivors, plus 6 additional casualties on the ground as the plane crashed into a residential area, bringing the total tally to 202 lives lost, making this the deadliest ever aviation accident on Taiwanese soil. But this record was set to be overtaken in just a few years. To close off the decade, we look at Flight CI-642, a McDonnell Douglas MD-11 landing in Hong Kong during a typhoon. The aircraft landed hard on its right main gear, then rolled over and skidded off the runway in flames. Since it was raining very heavily, the fire thankfully did not get worse and was quickly extinguished, no doubt resulting in the miraculously high survival rate. There were 315 people on board. 3 people on this flight sadly did not survive. With all that hype surrounding Y2K, the world did not come to an end. But China Airlines was unfortunately set to experience one final major accident. Ironically, by this time, the airline was actually making significant strides in their safety audits and operational excellence. But this accident has its roots from that 747 tail strike in 1980. With that tail strike, the rear portion of the aircraft was understandably damaged. Simply put, that section was meant to be cut out and a separate plate bolted and sealed onto that area to replace the damaged fuselage. But in 1980, ground engineers just put the extra plate straight onto the damaged area without cutting anything off from the original fuselage, leaving undetected cracks beneath growing over time. So whenever the plane took off for the next 22 years and the cabin got pressurized, cracks began to spread a little with every cycle. In May 2002, Flight CI-611 took off from Taipei Taoyuan bound for Hong Kong. As it leveled off at 35,000 feet, the damaged section, which was improperly repaired 22 years earlier, finally gave way, leading to the aircraft to break up in flight over Penghu, killing all 225 people on board. This statistic would top CI-676 in 1998 as the deadliest aviation accident on Taiwanese territory. The final accident in the airline's record was in August 2007. A Boeing 737-800 landed in Naha Airport on Okinawa Island in Japan, when a washer within the slat assembly became loose. After landing, and when the slats got retracted, this loose washer then punctured a hole in the fuel tank, resulting in a leak. As the aircraft came to a stop, the fuel leaking out of the tank contacted the hot engine surface and ignited. The resulting fire was captured by many with recording devices as the aircraft burned to a crisp while people on board evacuated. Everyone survived. Investigations pointed to a design flaw by Boeing and also the maintenance practices at China Airlines to be more vigilant in catching these flaws. So, the final tally, in case you weren't keeping tab, is 15 aircraft lost and a tragic total of 845 people killed since the airline's formation, making it one of the deadliest airlines in modern history. It's noteworthy the bulk of this number was from the 1990s onwards, as some of these aircraft involved were wide-body planes. And it was also from the 1990s that the airline started an extra emphasis on overhauling its safety practices to prevent any more tragedies from happening. And it has bore fruit, because incidents have almost tapered sharply down to zero. The China Airlines today is a very different animal. CRM practices within the cockpit has also turned upside down, but for the better. The overall product in present day is also a hit with travelers, winning several awards. In 2024, it has been named a 5-star airline by the Airline Passenger Experience Association. It's also a certified 4-star airline by Skytrax. And the Design Air has also named China Airlines the Design Airline of the Year for 2023 for its cabin flying experience. Ultimately, I'd like to think the airline has moved on from its crazy days of the past and have now truly transformed into one of the top airlines in the region. What do you think? Would you like to get on a China Airlines flight for your next trip? Let me know in the comments. In the meantime, let's join Live Ryan and say Yokosoe Shinchitose Kugo and welcome him into New Chitose International Airport.
And well guys, here I am. After so many years, this is my first time back in Japan. Gosh, the last time I was in Japan I was 12. So anyway, here I am in Japan after all that time, and this is New Chitose International Airport serving the city of Sapporo. So I'll be here for 48 hours and look out for, of course, foodie videos that's going to come up. Anyway, yeah, very excited to be here. So that was my flight on China Airlines. A very quick 3-hour flight, which was pretty fantastic, I think, what they offered. So anyway, I've chucked details of my Instagram on your screen right now, so hit me up there and chuck me a follow so you can actually come along with me on my travels in real time. And of course, more importantly, do not forget to hit subscribe and the bell notification icon, and I will see you for my next video. Bye!